It's time for another Monte and Wolf show. I'm Monte here with Wolf. It's BROVER, Wolf. It's
BROVER.
BROVER.
It's so BROVER.
I believed in them. I believed in them, Wolf. You know, I had bets this week on esports bet on both of Brion games for Brion to win, and also a parlay for them to win them both. And can you tell me what happened?
BROVER. Bro getting beaten by Liiv SANDBOX was one thing. You know, Liiv SANDBOX was kind of doing a little bit better. It looked like, Clozer's kind of got he's looking better these days. Like, he's had some bad games, he's had some really bad games, but he's had a few good games here at the end, and he's looking better. Okay, I'll give you that one. But to lose to Nongshim, and in the fashion in which they lost to Nongshim, that second game, it was almost a 5,000 gold lead, if I'm not mistaken, if not remembering wrong. But it felt like in my mind it was like a 20,000 gold lead because it was just such a winnable position. It was like you've got everything going for you. You've got complete map control. What do? They just started like looking at the Baron, like, I don't know about that. And then they just started walking around the map doing nothing. Like, what if we just take the enemy Raptors? That's what we'll do with this lead. And you could just see, like, and if you watch my cast with Atlas of this, you can see the moment, you can feel the moment where I just realized, like, no, bro's just not going to win. And I was like, wait, hold on, they're still ahead. I'm like, nah, it's done. Like, they're doing bro things. They're doing bro things. They're not going to win. I just, the part of my brain that's seen this so many times just saw the pattern and was like, oh, it's done. Yeah, they're up a few thousand gold, but it's done. They're not going to win. And then they didn't win.
I think the most painful part of the Brion game against Liiv Wolf was the fact that they actually did start the Baron and they had a giant lead and it was a good Baron attempt, and then they completely misplayed the Baron and then let Willer steal it.
There are moments with bro where, and we've talked about this on this show before. I feel like I've talked about this for the last 3 years where we're all like, oh, what, they were good. Actually, wait, hold on. But there are moments where when they have a lead, they don't start Baron when they have enough vision control and there's enough space. And like the enemy team has like 2 people showing somewhere else. They tried to kill your top laner and failed, and he has teleport, and like you're all on top side and you can do Baron, and they're like, no. But like when the enemy team has full vision of Baron, they're all right on top of Baron. They're all fucking super close. Yeah, let's do Baron now. I'm like, no.
Well, that wasn't even the problem. I mean,
not in this game, no.
Effort, yes, I hear what you're saying, but in this game, it was even more hilarious because Effort used all his spells to keep Willer out of pit, and for some reason, Karis just refused to flash Pop Blossom on top of 4 of them. He literally had a 4-man Pop Blossom if he just fucking flashes, and right instead he stands there staring at Willer while Willer just Arctic assaults into the pit and then takes the Baron. I was floored. Also, had plenty of time to spite that and didn't. So the layers of mistakes were rather insane.
And the layers of bro are like, even the crazier thing than all of this is that their early game, they are so decisive. Like, they go in, they fight, they skirmish extremely well. They take tons of early game fights. And I legit think that if you could actually take some of the best parts of bro in their early to mid game and take like the best parts of Hanwha Life Esports' late game and like put them together into one team, oh my god, it's a super team. But you see this team super decisive on first 2 Drake fights. Early Herald fights, they will take those. Morgan's gonna make some clutch play. Umpty's actually gonna go in there. It looks like it's a bad engage, but then they actually go up 3 kills, and you're like, wow, bro got a gold lead in the early game again. But when it comes to late game, where's that decisiveness? Where's that, like, let's go in. This is a sick angle for an ult, and we could actually win this fight just barely if we go in right now. And it's almost like Karis is like asking Umpty for permission, like, I'm ready, I can ult them, and Umpty's like, no, and he's like, okay, I won't do it. Like, Umpty said no. I don't know what's going on, but they clearly get nervous. You can see Umpty on his player cam when he dies in some of these situations as well. Like, he starts like looking like he's about to scream, and he just like holds it in, like he's clearly stressed out. He died in that second game against Nongshim, I believe, against the Kazakhs, where like he just got jumped on and he died kind of in an unlucky way. And he's just livid. You could tell he's like so mad and so stressed out. And this team just seems really like, even though they've been together for so long, a lot of parts of this roster, and they have a ton of experience, especially Umpty, like they just can't get it together under pressure, and they haven't been able to change that about them. And if you're Edgar, the coach, who's given them some fantastic drafts, you've got to be like, also kind of tired of it, kind of sick of it at this point.
um, it's interesting too because Brion really had to win that Liiv SANDBOX game because Liiv SANDBOX is now 2-0 against Brion, which means that in any kind of tie scenario, Liiv SANDBOX will come out ahead. And now they're a game ahead. Brion is, when we say it's BROVER, what we mean is, they play DRX, but then they have to play Gen.G. And SANDBOX has to play both T1 and KT. But basically, they might beat T1. But even in a situation where they're effectively tied, it's going to be very, very difficult for Brion to take that last playoff slot away from Liiv SANDBOX at this point in time.
And I do think that, Liiv SANDBOX, they played a good series against Bro and they deserve the win. But I feel like Bro is way better than Nongshim. Like, they're just a better team, but they couldn't do it anyways. And I guess at the end of the day, like, as much as you and I have been like, no, Bro's going, they're going to do it. They're actually a good team. Maybe they're just not. Maybe they're just not, Monty. Like, if they can't actually close games out, I guess they're not a good team, actually, as it turns out. I'm so sad about it, though, because I think for the first time, I was actually kind of like, Paris? Like, is he good? Like, is he good at Azir at least? Like, maybe.
He is a terrible Nico player, dude. Just god awful. Like, I've never seen a Nico player more reluctant to make plays than Karis. It is crazy, especially if you watch the amount of Nico that's played in the LPL and the how aggressively a lot of those mids play and look for opportunities to get the multi-man ults. It was sad. It's very sad to watch him play Nico.
Yeah.
On the other side, we can talk about Liiv SANDBOX a little bit because they have this new top laner who has subbed in for Bertle. Because we haven't talked about Liiv SANDBOX in a while, so Clear's in there. Willer has low key been one of the better junglers in the overall LCK. Clozer, as you say, has some up and down, but they made a roster move with Teddy, and Kyle was very good with Prince last year. Like he's definitely a pretty good support. So this team at least has been trending in the right direction and appears, if they can beat T1, in this coming week. And maybe they're more deserving of going to those playoffs than T1 is at this point in time, even though they've rallied late.
I mean, Liiv SANDBOX definitely having that late push, and I do think that this team might surprise people in terms of how they perform in playoffs as well. Like, they're likely to face Dplus or Hanwha in that first round of playoffs, assuming they make it. And I don't know if that's going to be a win, but I think they will play well in the playoffs because they are peaking at the end where it matters most. Teddy is really good. Like, the first 2 weeks of LCK, I was a little bit unsure. Like, he didn't look bad, but he definitely didn't look like his old self. But after like week 3, I thought, wow, Teddy's actually really good. And even in games where his team is just totally flubbing it, he's not, and he's playing really well. And I actually think that one of the happy things about this Liiv SANDBOX final performance here is that because the team is actually being a team, you can actually see, like, it's really easy to see that Teddy is a good AD carry right now, in my mind. Like, is he top 3? No, I wouldn't put him that far, but I think that since he has a short contract on Liiv SANDBOX, he probably gets picked up, actually, next season pretty easily and could go to a team that he prefers. I'd say not necessarily, like, his number one pick, but he could probably go to a strong team next season and actually get a pretty decent salary because I think he's proven himself here in the second season. So I think he's successfully rebooted his career because it looked like maybe it's pretty doomed for a while there, and he took that break. But I'm happy for him because I do really enjoy watching Teddy play, and I think he's really good for the LCK. He's a very popular player. So if nothing else, like, Teddy is back probably. Please stay in Korea.
Well, I mean, I think he probably will stay in Korea, but the question is, where would he go onto a top roster? Basically, all the rest of the playoff teams have ADCs that they would want to hang on to who are better than Teddy. And so one of those ADCs would have to go to China or something like that, right?
Well,
Wolf,
with the SFC,
SFR.
SFR, sorry, the Super Famicom, the Super Nintendo. That's why they can't. No, yes, SFR. Yeah, Sporting Financial Regulations. Who knows? Who knows what will happen? But I think some spots could open up potentially. And I don't know. Maybe he stays with Liiv SANDBOX. Maybe he enjoyed his time on the org, and some other adjustments are made. But it's a conversation for another time. But I do think he's really proven himself to be a strong AD carry. And when you think about it, we were talking about this yesterday off broadcast, but with Teddy now probably being that last AD carry in playoffs, and Guma actually looking pretty good
Yeah.
overall despite T1's struggles, it's a pretty stacked AD carry pool for our playoffs,
Yes.
actually.
Yep.
Like,
Very
it's
stacked.
kind of insane.
It's the best position in Korea. It's the position with the most depth in Korea right now, for sure. I think ADC is like the hardest to take a top 3 out of. We are going to be doing our all pro, what we would vote for as all pros later in this episode, and I think that's one of the tougher ones. That's one of the tougher ones.
Yeah, for sure.
Also, mid is weirdly tough, but only because there's a clear top 2, and then it's very difficult to choose a third place.
Yeah. So we can talk about, I feel like T1 and KT really briefly at the same time for different
Yes,
reasons.
the telecom war, the much hyped telecom war, guys.
Um,
KT, we talked about the last time that KT had beaten T1, right? Has there ever been a time, I actually don't know the answer to this question, where KT has swept both telecom wars in a split?
I tried to look this up, and since like the regular season format, like the 2015 format, I don't think so. Like when I checked, I'm pretty sure that's never happened before. And then obviously before that, like Telecom War was not the same type of like regular season thing, so it was just like, okay, well, these teams are matching up in an OGN tournament. And I don't know if that would really count. I mean, it wouldn't count the same way, obviously, because they wouldn't sweep them twice. But uh, I was thinking about this and looking back to the StarCraft days as well, and there wasn't really ever a time where KT was clearly favored, like ever that I can think about. Like when KT won Pro League in 2014,
It
they were
did
the
happen in
underdogs.
2018. I just looked it up. That would have been the only year that it would have happened, by the way. So it
It
did
did
happen in
happen in
2018.
2018?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Um, yeah, but that was the year with the Smeb score pawn UCAL deft roster. So
Yeah.
spring 2018 it happened, but it's been a very, very long time.
Yeah,
Um,
I specifically asked about that year when we were looking into stats, and someone said it didn't happen. So I guess I was just fed wrong on that one. But the um
it's fine. It happens.
the um the domination that we're seeing now, though, like I mean, 2018 was the only other year in League of Legends where KT was really dominant. And besides that, like it hasn't really been a thing. And like KT have changed their roster so many times since then that it hasn't been like KT really built a legacy or a dynasty or anything like that either. Like they kind of just cycled players every year. And I liked the Doran KT roster. I thought that one had some serious potential, but didn't work out at all. And then obviously this year they've really exploded in terms of their power. And I think just due to everybody on the roster, like this roster wasn't a super hype roster on paper, even though there's a lot of experience here. But I think every player overperformed what they were doing on their other teams, except maybe like the Hens. And Steam's suddenly really good. Like BDD on Nongshim was really not good, but put him on KT, he's actually suddenly excellent. Kiin on Kwangdong, struggling a little bit. Kwangdong's not a great team. Put him on KT, he's suddenly unlocked. Cuz, same story. So, I mean, this KT roster is looking like they're going to get first place, and I I am enjoying it a lot because I was like telling everyone like, oh yeah, KT is actually really strong. You were as well. We were the first, KT prophets. I guess we were like, yeah, no, this team
exactly.
actually so close to going to the finals in spring, and like this roster is not just going to go boom randomly. We're not going to be like, oh, don't get excited. No, it's actually KT's good.
Yep.
And so, just saying. T1, on the other hand, they got smashed by KT in that series. Poby had some like mediocre games, right, in the LCK, and we were like, oh yeah, he's a new mid laner. Like, what are you gonna say? Like, what are you gonna do? He's not having a great time. Like, they're giving him a lot of resources, so top's falling apart, whatever. But this KT series, he got destroyed. Like this one was the one where it was
He
like
got
he
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 got
did he
wrecked
looked
in
out of
lane,
his
dude.
league.
He got wrecked in
He
lane.
looked out of his league. Oh, for sure.
I
Um,
felt bad.
it's tough. Like he's clearly a good Jace player. At least like that's what he thinks and what KT thinks of him because they put him on Jace a lot, and he Jace is a tough champion. Like in the early levels, you can kind of show your hands a little bit, but then it's kind of about positioning because you're a squishy champion, doesn't really have escapes. Like you're like, I have phase rush, maybe. Can I get out? And I've got one knockback, maybe that'll see. But otherwise, if you get caught at any position, like you're just dead. You're super squishy. You're glass cannon. You have to position well. You have to be ready to aim shock blast well. You have to have a really good sense for where, when you fire shock blast blind, like where someone might be. It's wild when you watch pro Jace games how many times Jaces just fire blindly and actually get insane value because they have such a good sense of somebody's probably flanking in this bush. The enemy's got a flanking mid laner, like Nico, for example, might be in the bush. I'm gonna fire the shock blast in there. You hit him, you're like, all right, cool, high value. I don't think Poby has a sense of that just yet, but rumor has it, everyone is saying like it's one of those things where a few days ago, there was like a rumor about this, and then everybody was saying it, and it seemed to be confirmed. Even Tom saying it basically in an interview, it's almost certain that Faker will play next week. So Faker's going to come back next week. We'll get a better idea of what this team is going to look like for playoffs because they did secure playoffs this week. So it's really a matter of getting the team back into shape next week with some relatively easy opponents, and then just making sure that you can be ready to shot call again Faker when playoffs does happen.
Yeah, I mean, even the second game of this series it really did just feel like KT was styling on them. I don't think that's
Yeah.
a controversial opinion.
No.
It's not that the Vayne is inherently a troll pick. In fact, we've seen it as a Kai'Sa counter pick, right? This is not uncommon. We watched DDG do it in the playoffs with Uzi, and you can see really how it performs in the laning phase, because Uzi did get a pretty big laning advantage in that game, but did ultimately lose. This time around, though, aiming was just in the side lane, like solo killing Zeus on the Cassante, and he was just an absolute monster, snowballing insanely out of control, and completely took over the game, basically. And they made it look rather easy in the end,
Yeah.
KT.
We've seen a lot of Vayne games in the LCK. Well, not that we've seen a lot of Vayne games, but when we do, the rare times we see Vayne, what often happens is like you see a lot of early kills come through and the Vayne looks fed, and then she just can't do anything later on because she just can't. She doesn't have range, and like she gets focused down. Really easy to pick her off in fights if you play around that and just focus her down. Um, and in this game, like the lane swap situation for T1, they were kind of forced into because T1 took that really bad fight, which is how aiming got fed in the first place around Dragon, which was bonkers crazy that they actually just walked into that one. And then, like you said, aiming just kind of hit turrets. Like he was like, I will kill the turrets now. And Zeus is like, I'm here to stop that. He's like, I will kill you too. And then the Vayne actually kind of had high value. But I was really worried. I didn't like the draft from KT very much, but it was showboating. And
It sure
I,
was.
I really do think that KT are showing their personalities a little bit here. I like that a lot. It does make me happy that this team is down to do what T1 did when they were in their dominant position. Is just like, yeah, this draft is fun. We're gonna win anyways.
It's also risky for them, right? For them to showboat is kind of insane because they only have a 1-game lead on Gen.G, right? They
Yeah,
have the exact same series record and they have a 1-map lead. So, they don't actually have wiggle room. Like they need to be winning the winnable games, which granted they play Nongshim in Liiv SANDBOX, so they should 4-0 by, I think, most accounts. Maybe Liiv SANDBOX can take a game. And Gen.G might drop a game or even the series to Hanwha Life potentially. We can talk about that. But it is going to be, it was a little cocky, I think. Not that there's a huge difference between first and second seed, but being able to select your opponent is pretty valuable.
yeah. I mean, it could be the difference between having the option to not pick Hanwha, or to
Yeah.
pick whoever's not there. It's probably going to be Dplus, but I think being able to pick Dplus over picking Hanwha feels pretty nice. If you're
Yep.
KT, so we're living in a world where it could be like a KT Hanwha finals as well if Hanwha does upset. We'll talk about that as we get closer, but that would be a wild finals. That would be really exciting. And Gen.G also had that series against Dplus, which happened yesterday, and KT were knowing going into this T1 series that there was a chance that Gen.G would drop a game there because that series those teams normally play each other very close. They did not. Actually, as it
Well,
turned out, play. Game
I
2 was
mean,
not close.
I don't know, man. Like the whole thing about that series was that these were winnable games for
Yeah.
Dplus. And the gold was actually very close up until kind of, through the mid game. And it's just what's so fucking frustrating about Dplus is that Canyon will just randomly int or they'll misplay their composition. I was just so pissed off watching game 1 of that series, Wolf, where you get to see these beautiful drafts on red side from Dplus, right? Like they early pick the Nautilus. Oh, Gen.G's going to take the Sivir. They think that it's going to be the Nautilus support. Psych. No, it's Nautilus jungle because Canyon can play can play everything. I don't think he can play Nautilus, but we'll get to that.
Hmm.
And instead, you end up with a Sivir Alistair. Kellen pulls out his Heimerdinger classic pick. We go back, we just rewind time to last year where we saw the Varus and the Heimerdinger lanes. It's super oppressive. They get a massive gold lead in the bot lane. Deft is up 30 CS, 40 CS. You're feeling really good. And you're like, yes, just play your pressure, play through the bot lane. And then Canyon just randomly griefs under by trying a turret dive. It's like, no, just fucking set up at the objective, guys.
Yeah.
They let Gen.G back in the game. And, the problem with Dplus's composition is that once Sivir is basically just there for an ult. And once the Vi and the Jax and the Alistair are just running at you with Sivir ults, it's very, very difficult for Dplus to peel away from that. So you have to push that advantage and you have to set up early on objectives with your Varus, Heimer, and Jace poke. So you need to control Dragon. And as soon as Canyon starts trying to overplay that bot lane, they just fucking lose. And it's so sad.
It's because that was the one pressure point you had, and then it was just alleviated instantly the second that Canyon had his George of the Jungle moment over the wall. And like the sad thing about that too is I looked at that draft and I was like, all right, well, only Dplus can beat Gen.G at this 1-3-1 style with the Sivir if they play it well and they get ahead early enough, they can actually move around the map and pull this team apart. And I thought this game was going to be the close one of the two. It ended up being the second game, obviously, that went a little bit back and forth. It shouldn't have been that close, but it ended up being close. But the way in which with their lead, Gen.G played around this LeBlanc was just really fun to watch. It gave me hope that LeBlanc could be relevant again. Maybe I'm like, oh, okay, maybe we were a little bit too harsh on that pick. If it's played perfectly, can be great. And I really think the game was thrown around that bottom side play. But then in game 2, Chovy makes that super heroic play against the Lilia sleep. He gets over the wall and then gets to the turret and then actually just decides he's gonna dunk on Dplus, and that he does, which was insane. All the advantages that they got in that fight are just washed away by that Emperor's Divide. And then Canyon's, you talked about Canyon kind of randomly dying. He did make that poor play in game 1, but then on the Lilia just paths into mid for some reason and
Oh my
dies.
god, I couldn't
It was
believe
just
it.
it was
They
like
don't know how to play their compositions. And here's what's so frustrating about Dplus. Okay, so yeah, it was a hero play by Chovy that got some of those kills underneath the turret and bot lane. But at the same time, Dplus, for the love of God, you are playing a disengaged composition. Okay? Your entire purpose, if you play Lilia, LeBlanc, Ashe, Renekton, Rel, is to prevent them from engaging on you and kite them, right? You're low damage composition. You're poking them away and you want them to continually fight into you and grind them down over time. So you shouldn't be chasing the Azir under the turret, even if he's low. Don't give him that option to make the play. You had already won the fight. For Canyon, to your point, why are you running around in the mid lane pathing that direction when you need to play to catch their engage? That is what you should be doing. And it's just so frustrating because I don't really think that Bible did a lot in terms of improving shot calling of this roster, and his laning phase was definitely weaker, and he did get caught out a bunch of times, right? So it was nice to see Kellen have a stronger laning phase and for them to get those advantages in the bot lane again. But for the life of me, I don't understand why they can't play win conditions to their compositions in either of these games. If you just play your win condition, you probably win both of these.
It's fundamentally a strong draft they're given, and I think Gorilla and Acorn, but I think Gorilla more so has crafted these really nicely, and then just don't hit the benchmarks the way they're supposed to be hit. And like the way Canyon played Lilia was almost like he was going in first to try to set up engage and set up sleeps, and then they were like, let's go in on the sleeps. It was kind of like the way they were playing it, which I don't think they needed to play it that way at all, especially with the excuse me, with the build that Canyon had on the Lilia. It's not like he's super tanky. You know, he did stack a decent amount of health, and Demonic Embrace will help burn down. So it could have just kind of slow poke, go in, threaten a sleep, and then go back, slow poke, threaten a sleep. Are we?
And the
in
LeBlanc's
that?
on the flank, and there's the static shiv procking on you, and you're just
Yeah,
eating volleys. Like, there's a way to win with this composition if you're Dplus, but you have to play it slow.
yeah. They didn't, and it's I had the same conversation with a lot of people. I talked about this on the broadcast as well about the Kellen versus Bible angle. And a lot of people misunderstood what I meant when I was talking about that. I'm not saying the Bible is better. They need this player on the team. Don't misunderstand me. Kellen is actually one of the strongest support players at his best, especially at Enchanters in the LCK. But you could see why Dplus was experimenting with Bible,
Yes, for sure.
because there's a clear problem that they're hoping Bible might be able to solve, but it isn't happening yet. And so, like, Bible's in a little bit. He's got a weaker laning phase. He's yelling a lot. He's shot calling a lot. Maybe he's shot calling too much. Maybe the players aren't used to his style yet, so there's problems there. But Kellen clearly isn't able to make these fights happen on his terms and like set up these comps. I think Deft absolutely understands how these comps work, but he's the 80 carry, so it's awkward for him to be shot calling. It's really difficult to actually position well in fights and know everything that's going on around you, and then also be shot calling and also tracking, summoners and stuff like that. It's really tough. Like, it's usually the support player's job in teams like this to actually be that role.
I just feel bad for Deathman because he played that Ashe so well. Honestly, like watching him in these team fights, he was so good. And he's still just an amazing player, but he needs somebody else on his team to actually, have the brains, right? And, having Beryl last year, even though Beryl was kind of terrible mechanically, maybe that's what he needs, because as long as Deft can just be mechanically great, then that he can do really well, as we've seen. But he can't just play his mechanics in team fighting, which are excellent, when the team itself is in a losing position because they're not playing to their win conditions.
It's the difference between playing solo queue and playing with like a 5 stack with your friends is like the difference between, playing with a good shot caller and playing with no shot caller. In that, in professional games, people underestimate the power of shot calling because it's hard to see. Like, you can't see it with your eyes. It's almost never shown. People almost never release voice comms because it reveals stuff. Sometimes you'll see like voice comms on the LCK of like a team fight or some final moment, and then in those moments you can actually see how much they're calling, what's going on. They're saying like, oh, he's in the bush, he has no flash, whatever, stuff like this. Or you see at the end of the game where we show those comms very briefly. But shot calling is like half of the game, basically. Like, if you don't know what your comp is doing, or don't know what the enemy summoners are, or where they are, or where the teleport cooldown is, or which flank angle that Renekton's probably on as the 80 carry, like, how can you play? You're already like trying to figure out like, how can I position against the front line here and maximize my damage while also being safe. And if you have somebody telling you all of this information at the same time, you can make better decisions. And weak shot calling becomes pretty apparent very early on. For example, Dplus this season, a lot of great wins when Canyon is just pushing his team to massive early advantages to where shot calling doesn't matter. Like, Dplus are winning super hard, so they don't need to make good calls because they're so ahead. It's like, you don't need someone to tell you what to do. It's free, right? Like, that's kind of how Dplus wins. T1, take away Faker. Where's the shot calling on that team? It's instantly obvious that something has changed, right? So I think it's a very much under appreciated role, and I think that people always give Beryl shit for his mechanics, but like, it's very clear that he had a huge impact on both Damwon and DRX as a shot caller. It's just very obvious.
Yeah, also in draft too. I think
Yeah,
he's a major voice in draft. So as much as I think Beryl is washed as hell, uh,
he could
it's
make a
just crazy
fantastic
because
coach.
yeah, for sure. Maybe that's where it's going. Wolf. All right. Any other teams that you want to touch on briefly? This next week we got Gen.G versus Hanwha Life. That could actually be a very important match to potentially lock KT or Gen.G into that first seed. We also have Dplus versus Hanwha Life. So a couple good matches.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Hanwha Life week is pretty tough. We're pretty high on them right now, I'd say, and we're expecting them to take that third spot, but they will be tested, and could be a little bit of a precursor to Hanwha's playoffs run, these best of threes. So not in the same order, but they may end up facing off against Dplus, later on in the bracket, depending on how that goes. But the fact of the matter is, like, they and Dplus are going to the first round of playoffs. Seems almost definitely happening. And then Hanwha versus Gen.G, very likely if KT gets that first seed, they'll avoid them. So I'm looking forward to Hanwha versus Gen right now. I think I'm not ready to predict Hanwha, but I do think that they could win. I think it's not out of the realm of possibility, especially with Gen.G looking a little bit more vulnerable these days and Hanwha shoring up some of their problems in the early mid game.
I mean, I do think you have to wonder what happens if there's a heavy targeted ban at Zeka, because he's found a few champions that he's good on, and he's still playing the Akali a little bit to various degrees of success. But for the most part, I mean, he's been like Tristana, Azir, Yone, and his Yone's been very good. I mean, I think he's 7-1 on it so far, and he's one of just a couple players in the world, and the only active player currently, because Cream was eliminated on OMG over in the LPL playoffs and is out of the Chinese regional qualifier as well. But he does have some like pretty powerful pocket picks, but he has not been super versatile recently. And even on some of the other picks, like, yes, he's played Azir, but he's never been a great top tier Azir player, especially compared to other mids like, Chovy or BDD in this league.
Yeah, Azir is such a interesting champion because Azir is a champion where it's considered like the base easy champion. Like it gives you a lot of lane prio. So if you're not a super strong laning player, if you have Azir, it just makes your life easier. But I think the subtle parts of how hard Azir can be to play to, like, for example, get solo kills or set up flash takeaways when you hit level 6, and team fighting, like knowing when to go in and engage and knowing when to peel for your team. Like, that's the extreme hard part of Azir. I feel like the floor is pretty, the floor of Azir is like pretty simple, but then the ceiling becomes extremely complex. And I think Zeka's had his moments of peak Azir, but it's just not consistently. So yeah, I'd say that if this patch doesn't change too much, like, he'll probably be okay at this moment in time. But if the next upcoming patch actually changes a lot and the mid meta shifts away from Azir, which I don't expect, but if it does, we'll see what else he's got in the tank.
Yeah, and Grizz has been doing well. They haven't. Hanwha's not a skirmish early team. They're a kind of cross map and play late team, but it's working for them. And certainly they look better than they did under Klid's reign of tyranny on this roster. And it's nice to be able to see Viper unlocked a little bit in some of the late games.
Yeah. So we talk about All Pro now? Are we doing it?
All right, let's do it. All
right.
Pro. So how are you?
Let's go top to bottom.
Kiin MVP. Let's be very clear.
bottom.
What's the latest on the Kiin MVP talk? Are there still non-believers amongst the Korean side of things?
I have not really heard too much about it in the last 2 weeks or so. But I like, when I mentioned Kiin to some of the Korean commentators, like, and I just kind of casually mentioned, like, oh yeah, Kiin, like, what do you guys think, MVP? Or people kind of give me like a raised eyebrow, like, oh, that's a good thought, like, oh yes, it could be, yeah, actually that's like, they're kind of like, wow, yeah, like, kind of reaction is, generally speaking, kind of like, I didn't think about it that way, but yeah, you're probably right, kind of reaction. So I'm not 100% sure what's going to happen with those votes. But Pays has trended downward a little bit, so I don't think he's going to be necessarily like the because, I mean, I've talked with a few people about Pays recently about, like, is he going to get MVP, and people are still thinking, yeah, he's probably still just going to get it because it seems like the safest pick. But
what the fuck, man?
I'm not voting for him for MVP or first and all pro.
How could he possibly? How could he possibly get this? This conversation is so stupid, especially if Gen.G isn't the first place team. So the thesis is this: that Pays is so good that he carried the rest of Gen.G to a top 2 finish. I mean, Kiin is that good. Kiin is the diff with Kiin is huge between him and the next top player.
Oh yeah, I mean, look, I'm not every time I explain why I think people are gonna vote for Pays, everyone's like, "Wolf's voting for Pays." I'm like, no. I'm trying to actually rationalize like the insanity. I'm trying to figure it out, but I do think that he was one of the most consistent players for the first round robin and had incredible plays there.
Sure.
But like, it wasn't to me MVP worthy. And if he had the similar level of performance he had in round one and round two, and Gen.G was actually playing through him a lot, and he was actually kind of the main character for Gen.G, then I would have been okay having the conversation about it. But at the moment, I don't think so. And for me, Kiin has been pretty season defining. Like, he has crushed so many strong top laners in lane. His team fighting has been phenomenal. He's played such a wide
Yes, keep going.
champion pool. He's the only one who's playing Malphite successfully. Um,
That's right. I'm coming, Wolf. I'm coming. Yes, keep going. Keep going.
I mean, like, when I think about MVP right now, it's kind of like, who's even next for Kiin? Is it BDD? Like, because maybe it's BDD who you would put like second. Is it Cuz? Like,
No.
and then when you start thinking about like, it doesn't really make sense. You're like, well, it's definitely Kiin, right? Like, I mean, Doran is not even close in the conversation, unfortunately, and I mean, it just seems like it's a Kiin angle. Like, I feel like I'm voting for Kiin.
Good.
And Kiin has not been as dominant, to be honest, in the last like 3 weeks, but he's still been by far the most dominant player and the most consistent player, I think.
He's done his job in the last few weeks, though.
Yeah.
I mean, he hasn't necessarily had the burden to carry other games. Like, does he have to do anything when aiming has 13 kills on Vayne? Like, no, you know. he doesn't need to make the hero plays in those circumstances. He just needs to do his fucking job, and he does it.
So
before we get into
all
second? All right.
Yeah.
Before we get into
for Kiin?
For MVP?
No, for top.
Oh, for top. Okay. For top, this one's a little tough. Like, do you go with Doran because he was styling on kids for a long time in the middle of the split? He did kind of run it down a little bit early in the split, but his team fighting's been very good. I think there's a pretty compelling case for Dudu.
Yeah. Like, actually, like, unironically, it's hard though because Dudu's kind of been running it a little bit.
Hey, what are you gonna do on this team? I'm sorry, Taeyun is by far the worst AD carry in this entire fucking league, and Dudu is the only bright spot on this roster. I mean, who else are you gonna put up there? Truly,
I mean, it's Doran or Kana's had some pretty good series, I'd say. Not all.
I think Dudu has been the best player on a pretty bad team outside of. I mean, Bulldog is the other player that you would look at on Kwangdong. But Kana, the problem is everybody else has been very inconsistent. I would say Doran is second just because, yeah, he can get solo killed, but he still does his job and does actually a lot in some late game team fights. He had a rough series versus Kiin. Zeus fell apart as soon as Faker left. So in spite of starting strong, especially because we have to consider the fact that Dudu plays with a pretty lackluster roster and is clearly like still a very good top laner. I think that for me, third place is Dudu. I think that's fair. I think if Dudu was on a good team, this would be a very different conversation.
I actually think that Dudu might be potentially on track to follow like the Teddy arc of like good player on bad team goes to T1. Like, I actually think like Dudu could get picked up by T1, for example, next year if Zeus doesn't stay, like, or picked up by Dplus, for example, because he is so good, so consistent, and he also seems to be a player that when you listen to comms and stuff is pretty helpful and actually is the type of player who works on his champion pool and is always trying to improve. Like, he very clearly hasn't fallen into the same like pitfall that the rest of Kwangdong has of the depths of, oh, woe is us, we can't win anything, and we're just not confident, and we're not playing together as a team. Dude's like, I'm gonna do it actually anyways. You guys can like wallow. I'm gonna win. He seems like he has a really positive mentality, And like, yeah, in the last few weeks, he has struggled a little bit more. I would say like he hasn't had that same, shining top line. Like the one gold lead is like the top with Dudu. He hasn't had that sort of performance like the last few weeks, but um, I think he's going places. I do think that he deserves a chance on a top team. And with some of the new incoming salary rules, like players like Dudu might actually have an opportunity to move up a little bit depending on who stays in Korea and who doesn't, and who stays on some of the top teams and who potentially moves on. So I hope that he finds a good home, and I think he probably will. Like I think at this point, there's just so much proof that this guy is like legit, probably top 3 in the
I mean,
LCK.
if we're being honest, Kwangdong actually isn't that far away from being a halfway decent team. Like I think if you replace Taeyun, this team probably gets a few more wins immediately, right? And so perhaps this Kwangdong like grow the rookies project. Sometimes it can take a couple years. Like you find the good ones. After a year, you're like, well, Taeyun just isn't it. So we're gonna try another one, and eventually, like after 2-3 years, you can actually assemble quite a solid core to your roster and kind of incrementally improve. You got to ditch Taeyun, but beyond that, I think he could also stay on Kwangdong, and if they make a couple upgrades, then maybe he's legit there too.
Could be. I imagine that he's probably pretty tired of staying with the Kwangdong though. I imagine he's probably like I think he's probably looking for a greener pasture. I'm feeling like he probably doesn't have that much loyalty to the org at this moment in time. I don't think he's gonna be like, hold on guys, I got you. Hold on, I'm sticking around for one more year. Let's one more run. Come on, CV Max. I don't know if that's where he's at mentality wise right now.
Fair enough. Maybe CV Max will give him a rousing speech and convince him to stay.
But yeah, I'm down. I'm actually happy, at least at this moment in time, going Kiin, Doran, Dudu. I think that's actually pretty reasonable.
I think you can make a lot of arguments for the third place position because it's just been a lot of inconsistency among the top laners on some of the better teams in the league. And for me, Dudu's performance on a bad roster stands out much more than Zeus not doing too great, or I mean, you could maybe make the same argument a little bit for Rascal, but I think Dudu has shown some pretty unique highs this split.
Yeah, Rascal, I feel like has had too many unique lows. Let's say this season. For jungle.
Wait, before we go to jungle,
Okay,
you have to mention about. I want to go back to something for esports bet that you mentioned earlier, Wolf. So it's not our match of the week this week, but the odds right now are T1 at 1.796 to 2.084 for Liiv SANDBOX, which if Faker comes back, probably are very good odds for T1 because they should beat Liiv SANDBOX with Faker. You would think, right, Wolf?
you would
Even though he's been out.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I mean, there were definitely problems before Faker left,
Sure.
but not losing to Liiv SANDBOX problems. I don't think. I wouldn't say.
Also, you'd have to imagine that the environment of the team would be quite upbeat if Faker was coming back too. Probably a lot more positive. And I think honestly, a lot of what's been happening to T1 is simply just mentality issues. So having Faker back, I think will solve a lot of that and raise spirits. There are a couple promotions for esports bet that you guys should know about coming up that are pretty fun. Right now, so they've changed the name of DJT, which is their proprietary token, which is free, and you can exchange for USDT or other cryptocurrencies. But you can get a bunch of that for free right now. It's now called Esports Coin or ESC. So all you have to do is if you join their Discord, which you can find link below, you get 10,000 ESC. If you follow them on Twitter, you get 5,000. Follow them on Instagram, get 5,000. So you get up to 20,000. All you have to do is do those things and message them either in Discord, message the mods in Discord, or just message on the website itself. There's like a chat box, and they'll give you all that ESC to play along with. And you can use that then if you sign up using our referral link for our match of the week, which will be Golden Guardians versus NRG. We got it wrong for the first time because NRG won last week, but they will not win this week. Golden Guardians will win this week, I do believe. And that means you get up to an additional 10% profit every week if you bet on that match and you pick the right winner. And that's great. Up to $100 USDT or its equivalent in other cryptocurrencies, including ESC if you just sign up for a bunch of the free stuff. And yeah, it's a fun way to play along. You can use cryptocurrency. You can use esports coin, whatever you want. Just have fun. So head on over there.
Get in there.
All right, jungle.
So jungle, I think a lot of people expect that people are going to be voting Canyon. I am not going to be voting Canyon for first for all pro for jungle.
Dude,
It is
what I fucking
100%
love.
not Canyon.
What I love is that the player of the game standings are just troll because Canyon is currently leading player of the game standings. Because if he has a good game, those are the only games that Dplus win. And you don't see all the insane griefing he does, like on Nautilus or Sejuani a lot of the time. You know, when he has to play these more supportive tank picks, he just completely runs it down. And so he's also, if there was like an anti-player of the game, he would also be leading in that. It's just the coin flip of, you know, peasant or god that you get with Canyon. So no, he is not actually one of the best junglers right now. He is just hilariously inconsistent.
Yeah, I mean there have certainly been games where I've watched Dplus lose, and I would like to choose player of the game as Canyon, because he won the game for the enemy team.
Exactly. He's both the
So,
he's both the player and anti-player.
um, I think Canyon has had some really high highs, but the POG standings, the POG standings, kind of they're a little bit of fake news. They kind of are very misleading. I think in terms of his performances. And for me, like it's either Cuz or Peanut, right? And Cuz has been
I think it's Peanut personally, but
I felt like Cuz made a much higher impact in round 1 than Peanut did, but I feel like Peanut's round 2 is much stronger than Cuz's. So I feel like both are quantifiable. But if we're looking at like recent results, Peanut has I think been way stronger. Peanut is actually insanely good right now, and he is. You watch him play, and he's never wasting time. Like he's almost never not making an impact. Like he's grabbing flashes or pushing people on the wall in mid. He's like, yeah, just casually, like I'm going bottom to clear my camps right now, but let me just take away half of the mid laner's health bar on my way over. Like, yeah, whatever. I'm gonna come over here. Because I asked my mid laner to put a control word there. Chovy's like, yeah, I got you. Put a control word there. We'll see if we can get something in mid. Oh, okay. We either killed him or took half of his health, and now Chovy's winning the lane even harder. And oh, now I'm going to go bottom side and clear my camps and then make a gank happen down there. He's always applying pressure. And if he has a lane that has pressure, like, for example, if Doran is winning top side, he will just camp the lane and get Doran massively fed. And his pathing is just beautiful, to put it frankly. And we've always called Peanut like the brains jungler. Sometimes he messes up his positioning in the late game. Sometimes the hands can be a bit of an issue. And sometimes he'll just kind of die like Canyon, like to put it in recent perspectives, at the end of the game. But this season, not so much actually. This season, he's not really doing that. Like he's not really throwing. He's not really dying randomly. So
yep, I agree with all
it's
that.
really hard for me because I think
also, you know, he's been playing a bunch of carry junglers. So I mean, he's played more Kha'Zix than anybody else, and he's 100% win rate. I think he's 7-0 on Kha'Zix now. Yeah, 7-0, 8-0 on Vi. So you know, it's really difficult to stop this guy. He's been great, and I you know, he's still not mechanically the most impressive jungler, but he doesn't have to be if he uses his brain. The problem with Peanut was that he would absolutely lose games late by getting caught out, and that has happened a lot less this split.
Yeah,
Now,
it's really just not happening that much.
could it happen in crucial moments? Possibly.
Possibly, but
Possibly.
99 out of 100 times he's absolutely popping off. I feel like, and Cuz has.
So my argument here is that I would consider Peanut an MVP candidate for the league, but I would not consider Cuz an MVP candidate. I think my personal opinion is that Peanut is the leading MVP candidate on Gen.G. If you are going to pick a Gen.G player, I would say that Peanut is that guy. Because of the outstanding impact that he's had. And Chovy has been good, but not great. And I think this team looks very, very different without Peanut in the early game and Peanut at the helm of their shot calling in the late game. And he himself has picked up a lot of the damage slack. He's one of the I think he's the highest DPM of any jungler in this league. Part of that, again, is obviously his champion selections and playing so much Kha'Zix. But he's been doing really well with it. And it is hard. It is hard to play Kha'Zix as a professional team because if you do standard team fighting, you will get your cheeks clapped. So you do have to play very specifically around the Kha'Zix and enable the Kha'Zix, and they do that. And he has been successful.
Puz has done a lot for aiming and BDD in terms of like what his early games look like, his pathing, and he's doing a lot with just, Sejuani or more utility jungle picks where it's not the carry so much. Like getting aiming ahead on Kai'Sa, for example, or getting him ahead on a multitude of picks, getting him ahead on Aphelios, for example, was something he was doing very well. And kind of enabling aiming to have stronger mid game fights, and they like to skirmish around bottom side a lot, especially if they have bottom prio. Going for early Drakes rather than Heralds was like what round one looked like to me for KT. And Cuz has been really decisive around team fights as well. Like he'll look for a pick. He's been good at securing objectives, controlling smites. Um, his Poppy, like not as good as Peanuts, for example. And the more I think about it, like the more I actually talk about it, and I think about like why was I excited about Cuz before, and like how he got aiming or Kiin or BD into a good position, and to often carry the game. I feel like Peanut has just been more impressive to me though. The more I think about it, I'm like, yeah, I mean, Cuz has done a lot, but Peanut still seemed to be more impactful every game. Whereas I think KT didn't rely on Cuz as much. Like I think the impact, like Peanut is needed for Gen.G, whereas Cuz, like he's done a good job, but if you put Peanut in KT, who's to say they could be even a better team? Like it's if the impact,
Yeah.
like the reliance on Peanut versus like similar impacts of two teams that are like two games apart from each other, one game apart from each other is like it's hard to quantify. But I think Peanut has been a more integral part of Gen.G.
And here's where it gets weird, Wolf. What do you value for your third pick? Do you value, who has actually been very good? He has the highest first blood percentage of any jungler. He's a big reason why Brion gets early game leads. He's also a big reason why they lose in the late game because he gets picked. Do you value Canyon, who will win you games, like a lot of games, but he will also lose you a lot of games? You can't really pick Grizzly
Yeah,
because
Grizzly's too
he's
not
too
enough
new.
games. Yeah.
Yeah, he's too new. Do you go with Willer, who has had a lot of like game-winning steals of important objectives and who has been a very good jungler? Owner, I think, has been also very up and down, but so has everybody outside of Gumayushi on T1. I don't know. I think it's tough. I think this one's really hard.
This one's really hard. I mean, we were being harsh on Canyon earlier to the tune of he's definitely not getting first, right? But it is hard to argue that in his best games he hasn't made the most impact out of the remaining junglers.
I mean, he has had the highest high of any jungler this split. I mean,
So
some of these Nico games are fucking unreal.
and his champion pool is quite massive, even though sometimes we do question some of the picks, like the Nautilus. I think it's probably going to be Canyon for me because as much as Willer has had those cool steals, he's also had some really rough games where he didn't do anything. Same with Umpty. Like Umpty is incredible in the early game, and you can't deny that his shot calling in the early game and his aggressive tendencies there, first blood percentage, etc., fantastic. Like Bro's early game is fantastic, but like watch his late game, and be like, yeah, not feeling so good about that. As Canyon also has, see that last series against Gen.G had some bad moments in the late game, but feels way less prevalent than what we've seen from Umpty and some of the bad calls that he has made around Barons and stuff like that. So when you really like get down to like brass tacks and you kind of like boil these junglers a little bit, I feel like Canyon is the one that remains. Because owner is not, it's not him, it's not Young Jay, okay. Uh So, and Grizzly's too new, and Clid would have never been in the conversation anyways. To be totally honest, like even if Hanwha gets top 3 with Clid, it's not because of Clid.
It's been in
So
spite of their junglers. Not to
yeah,
say Grizzly's bad, but he's just a rookie and still makes some rookie mistakes, and they don't really rely on him to be a early game threat at all. That's not his purpose. His purpose is to not run it, which is already better than Clid.
yeah, and I think he's learning a lot. He's learning pretty quickly. There's a pretty
Sure.
good
I mean,
chance that
he's had a good start for sure. He's had a good
yeah,
start.
I think there's a pretty good chance that if he sticks with this team, and especially if the team stays together, who knows if that's going to happen? It seems unlikely at this point. But if they did stay together and he stays with this team, I think he could grow with them, and they could become a real powerhouse team. But again, considering they have two defending world champions, and Viper, also a world champion on this roster. And with the salary rules that are coming through, I don't see it sticking
I mean,
together.
it's also just hilarious because like Kiin, Zeka, and Viper are all just signed until the end of this year. They're all on 1-year deals. So
yeah, so I don't see it staying together, but I think Grizzly's got a future. You know, I think hopefully he doesn't get like put into like Nongshim jail or something like that. I actually think he could develop as a player on a good team, and I'd be down to take a risk on him if I was a GM looking for a jungler for next season. But yeah, he doesn't get to be in the conversation. I'm going Canyon. That's kind of my final answer for number 3.
I think that's fair. I think you might be able to make an argument for Willer, but I agree the highs of Canyon need to be respected. He has had some really great games. Man, it's actually, I was just looking at all these contracts. It is incredible how many people are going to be free agents at the end of this year.
Well, so you remember on this topic very briefly, you remember we had those rules that were announced for agency, like regulations and like star players or whatever that we talked with Arnold about this just recently. It seems like some of these rules might be like kind of combined with the SFR and like might not even still necessarily be a thing, but I think a lot of the reasons why the signing windows were pushed out to the end of this year specifically for a lot of teams were that these discussions were happening and we knew, okay, this offseason is going to be the one where everything changes and teams hopefully won't be bleeding as much money. So some of these contracts obviously just set up for 1 year coincidentally, but I think some of these 2 years were like, okay, when we hit that point, maybe we can save some money. So I'm guessing that's why a lot of these contracts are about to expire around this time and everything's going to explode. But that's just a theory.
I mean, it's just crazy. It's like everybody in the league, basically. I'm looking at all of these contracts and like Pays is 2024 and BDD is 2024. But everybody else on the top teams, I mean, Canyon, Showmaker, Deft, Chovy,
Kiin,
Peanut, Kiin, Aiming, Zeka, Kingen, Viper, who else? Yeah, I mean it's Zeus, Gumayushi, all up at the end of this year. There is going to be a psychotic offseason in Korea this year.
It is going to be the most insane offseason we've had in a long time. And maybe we could talk about it a little bit more in depth like next episode or something, but I don't know if it will end on a high note.
I'll get the full list of players. I'll get the full list of players.
Yeah.
It's gonna be wild though.
It is gonna be crazy. So buckle up. Buckle up for this one. It's gonna be very stressful for everyone. So mid. For me it's BDD. It's not hard for me. It's pretty easy BDD.
It's BDD then Chovy. And then here's a wacky question, Wolf. Is it Faker? Because we now have lived a life without Faker. We know what he did for the team.
I don't think so. But the thing is, like, if it's not Faker, then who is it? Because it's not Showmaker. And
is it Zeka?
It's not Zeka.
Are you sure?
I mean, is it Zeka? Is that where we're at right now? I'm looking through the list, like looking for inspiration. I'm like, maybe it is Zeka.
You're either going to make a case for Bulldog because he's a good player, like he's a pretty good player on a bad team, but I feel like he hasn't had the same highs that he did earlier. And Showmaker has been okay. Who else would you argue for? Clozer's been doing better recently.
Oh man, it is Zeka. Oh my god,
it's Zeka. Monte. Isn't that gross, dude?
It's not Clozer. It's not Clozer. It's Zeka. And like
Zeka is second in the player of the game standings behind Canyon.
I have to admit that like Zeka has really improved over the course of the season because at the beginning we were like, okay, he's very mid, you know, but is he like, and even in spring season we were like, is he the world championship Zeka? He's so good at a Akali, which isn't relevant. Like, you know, we were a little bit quick to call him out for having some pretty weak performances in a pretty abysmal champion pool. But even without the Silas, you know, that never really came back, he's played the Yone very well. His Azir's been serviceable. LeBlanc, not really notable. He tried to play Akali in this meta, which is definitely going to the cons column for me.
Yeah, he's 2-1 on it.
Yeah, he did hard force it, and the one time he lost was a kind of a sad one because I think that was against KT even. He was like 5-0 on the Akali,
Yep.
but couldn't actually team fight.
Yep.
But he's pretty good. Like he at the end of the season, like I don't know why I don't want to trust Zeka, but I always feel like he's overhyped and I don't want to trust him. But I think in this case, it is him after Chovy. Yeah, if you really look at the rest of the options, like Faker has not been consistent enough, and I think part of that was because he was actually having issues with his
Sure. He was injured.
arm, and but I still have to take that into account, and he's still injured as we speak, and if we were playing like a fantasy world where like the third all pro team actually plays together, like you know I wouldn't expect Faker to be playing at his best, but I guess it's Zeka. That's weird.
I agree. I think it
Our
is.
mid pool's a little bit not so great at the moment, isn't it? If you
Yeah,
think about
no,
it.
it's not. It's not. And at the very least, you do have to credit Zeka because the fact that his Yone is so good is drawing a lot of bans. And that means that he's absorbing bans for his team and he's getting power picks in return. Like he's getting very meta picks in Tristana and Azir. So it's not like the trades are necessarily going badly in
Yeah,
the draft phase for Hanwha Life.
and they
Which
don't
is a
have to play
valuable role.
through. They don't have to play through Zeka. Like they will if he gets Yone, but if he's just going to be a facilitative Azir and just protect Viper, that's fine. Like he doesn't have to be BDD. He doesn't have to
Yeah.
be Chovy. Like he's not that type of player.
I think the issue is that we know he's limited. And the fact that he can't play Jace is really a big concern. I just looked it up. He's played 2 games of Jace in his entire career. So it's not that he can even play all of the power picks. It's that he has a must ban pocket pick and he can play enough of the other picks. But I do wonder what happens if a lot of these bans come out. And I'm curious if that actually occurs in their series versus Gen.G this week, if they try and pinch his champion pool and see what happens.
Yeah, I'd be really curious as well. It's tougher to do that on the new patch because we are moving to 13-14 next week. So I don't know if Gen.G will be prepared to do that. But they also face Hanwha first, so they don't get like a game to see what Hanwha's read on the patches. But I still think you could try it, and I hope that they do just for like our learning purposes here. Yeah, I go Zeka because there isn't a better option, I'd say, for third for me right now. And like Zeka has been impressive, and he has picked up a lot of POGs because the games were defined by his like really good engages. So it doesn't feel bad; it feels weird. And I think that just says a lot about the state of the mid pool in the LCK.
Yep. Yep. All right. 80 carry.
Bot's the arguably the most interesting one, isn't it?
I don't know. I just keep hearing that Pays is the MVP, so he must be first team all pro. Like it must be really clear that Pays is the best AD carry in the entire league, right?
For
Right?
me, it's more unclear whether Viper or Aiming are the best AD carry in the
Haha.
LCK.
It's Viper.
But Aiming has had some really good games. Obviously, part of the reason why Aiming has had great games is because his team sets him up, and then he's Kai'Sa, and then he gets like 13 kills, and you're like, oh,
Yeah, they
okay,
have good
Aiming's
drafts.
Kai'Sa's really good. Yeah, they have good drafts, they have a good team. Um,
I mean, Aiming, here are arguments for Aiming. Aiming has been very dominant. He is by far, in terms of gold difference at 10, XP difference at 10, the leader in terms of in the LCK. The only player above him in CS percentage after 15 is Vital, who hasn't even played all the games of the split. So Aiming gets the most farm in the mid and late game. He is
he's Shivan.
Yeah. He's actually below both Deft and Viper in damage per minute. Deft is actually number 1 in damage per minute. But in damage percentage after 15 minutes, Aiming is huge. He has 34.4% of KT's damage after 15 minutes. So he's high resource, but he is fucking delivering. So Aiming has done his job. Like he has done his job. He's been good in lane, and that success in lane has translated into being able to take an enormous percentage of his team's farm and then turn that into carry performances.
Viper is like with the eye test, you can kind of see that Viper has been making a huge impact, and like his positioning is phenomenal. Viper's Aphelios throughout the season was probably the best that anyone's seen. He's just really good at those types of late game scaling picks. Um, the thing about Viper is that I feel like his lane dominance isn't as strong
He has
as
to lane with Life, and Aiming gets to lane with the hens, dude.
I mean, Life's not bad though.
Here's my
It's
question.
not like he's
Here's
laning
how we
with
have to
Carol.
look. Life's okay, but here's how we have to separate this. I think we do the supports first because that's going to inform the AD carry conversation.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Because I think, this is a really interesting conversation about whether it's Delight or Lehens for number one. Because I think both of those players are very close, which then because, my argument is that because Viper actually leads the league in total damage percentage for his team. It's even more impressive in a way because I'm not sure Life is really, he might be in the top 3 conversation, I guess, but I would say it's a pretty big difference. And for me, I would put Lehens as number 1 because I think he's been the most consistent across metas and he's ending this split extremely strong. And Delight has been great as well. And then in the third place, who do we put there, right?
I mean, for me, like the difference between Lehens and Life is really just a matter of Lehens being much more versatile, but then Delight being, I think I said Life, but yeah, Delight and Lehens. The difference between Delight and Lehens is that Lehens is a much more versatile champion pool, and can play throughout so many different metas, whereas Delight is more reliant on like Rakan, for example. But I would say also that Delight has been a little bit more consistently impactful in team fights than Lehens has been. So that's really where you have to draw the line. I've been going back and forth on this one. This one is like one of the closest ones out of all the rules, and I feel like I'm biased towards Lehens because I like the way KT uses him, and I like the way that he plays and sets up picks and can even play for BDD, roams a lot. His Blitzcrank is fantastic. But if it's like a classical style of League of Legends, just team fighting and front to backing and looking for flanks and engages and making high impact and getting like multi-man CC, then it's probably Delight is doing that way more often than
I find Delight is a very creative player in the way he plays the game. Like he thinks on the fly about what he can do, and he makes very unique and surprising plays.
Yeah. He finds so many really cool clutch engages. Like he clutches so hard. Like he just suddenly sees the angles and then he goes in and finds like triple charm knockup in a tri brush and nobody could see the angle which he like flashed over a wall and then made that happen with, and then Gen.G just wins the fight instantly by default because of him. And I feel like he's criminally underrated in terms of his POGs. Like Lens always gets POG because he does something like crazy, and it's like, oh, he played Blitzcrank again, and like he got all those crazy hooks, and like that Lens character. Whereas Delight like arguably makes like more impressive outplays, but he doesn't get POG because it's like, oh, he played Rakan. Like that's not fun. I'm not gonna vote for him. Whereas like Lens is like, I played Singed. Everyone's gonna vote for me because I played Singed.
Right.
So I feel like I feel like I'm also kind of trapped in this like mentality of like Lehens does the cool stuff that I like, so I think he's better. But I when I think about it, I'm like, maybe it's Delight though. I'm not 100% sure, but I think this one could go either way, and I'll probably decide after the end of next week when those votes come through. But I'm leaning towards Delight like 51-49. But I mean, either way, you can't go wrong.
I think the difference for me is that the meta has gone more in Lehens' favor because he's been so good on Nautilus and Alistair, that I think if the meta hadn't kind of tilted in Lehens' favor, that this would be kind of a different conversation, and I would give it to Delight. But it just feels like Lehens is being empowered by the meta game that as it exists right now, and that means that I think I put him slightly ahead. But we'll see what happens in this last week.
His Alistair is so good. It's crazy. And I think because of Lehens' Alistair, a lot of people are picking Alistair even when Rel is not on the other team, just because they're like, oh no, this pick actually seems really powerful right now. Especially when Lehens is playing it. So I'll definitely give you that. It seems like recently it is leaned towards Lehens in terms of what's strong at the moment. For third though, it's a little bit tougher because I don't think like I thought about this a lot last week, and I was like, is Keria in the conversation for third? And I don't think so. Actually, I just don't think he's made the impacts consistently enough this season for me to put him there. It's not Kellen. You know, Kellen hasn't been high impact this season, in my opinion, and was even subbed out for Bible. Again, not because of performance, just because they're trying stuff, but Kellen hasn't been able to clearly make the shot calling impact just based on what we're seeing and what I've heard from the coaching staff. Um, like, I wouldn't hate if Kellen gets in third, to be honest, but it just doesn't seem like he has made the third highest impact. And that's when we get to Life, and Life has been pretty good. Like,
It's been okay. The
he's
thing is, he's been consistent.
yeah.
The other, you can make here. I'll make some brief other arguments. Effort has been shockingly good in the engage meta, but he was pretty garbage in the enchanter meta. So recently, I would say effort, especially some of his Alistair plays, have been like crazy good.
I mean, he's just historically a great Alistair player, right? It's a
Right.
fantastic meta for him. His Nautilus as well. Those are like the two
Yes.
picks that he excels on.
But that's not the whole split, right? That's only been the last couple of weeks. Kyle has also been good, and I think has been overlooked a lot of the time throughout his career because this year Liiv SANDBOX isn't doing well, and last year he had Prince that he was laning with, so he didn't necessarily get the props he deserved. But I think he was in the conversation for top 3 supports last year at the end of summer.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely.
so is he in the conversation again, or is it just Life who's been acceptable but lacks some of the highs of these other players?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about it too. Like, it's kind of like if Keria had played maybe 10% better, like more consistently, because Keria had some really high highs this season, as he always does. If he just played like 10% more consistently, I think I
Yeah.
would consider him here. And then if Kellen had like 10% more clutch plays, I'd be like, oh, okay, like Kellen had some really game defining plays, but I feel like he really hasn't this season. Like last year, Kellen was absolutely popping off when Renata came out, and he was like playing that champ to its full potential and having insane laning phases and having team fight winning ultimates. Like that's when I was like all super on the Kellen hype train. But this season on engaged supports hasn't been the same level of play from him. And I think it's Life, and it feels similar to when we put Zeka in third for mid, where it's Life has been very consistent, hasn't been flashy. It's not a pick you throw around when you talk about the best supports in LCK, but he's like just one tier above what else we have, you know. So I think it's probably Life for me. That's what I'm doing.
All right. 80 carry now. Now we can have this conversation because this one's really tough. I think for me, because the reason why this is hard, guys, is because Gumayushi has actually been the only player who hasn't been a potato on T1 since Faker left, and he has actually kept T1 in games. And he has attempted to have very hard carry performances from losing situations that have been impressive. And kind of rounding out the pool are obviously Aiming, who is like the king of the hyper-fed late game carry. And he gets the most resources, but he also converts those resources well. Viper is, again, he's another high resource carry, but he has the highest percentage of team damage as a whole, so not just after 15 minutes, but as a whole throughout the entire game, for his team as an AD carry, and he often is the reason why Hanwha is so successful in the late game.
I want
Deft,
to see. I wanted to
Deft is
see. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Deft is still amazing in terms of team fighting, but they're not always able to play through Deft to a win, which is more of a Dplus problem than I think a Deft problem. Pays has been really good. But I think for me, it's probably Viper first, and then probably Aiming, and then Pays.
That's kind of what I'm feeling right now as well. I wanted to look up the DPM actually stat for
Deft is highest,
AD carry.
actually, at
Yeah,
709,
that's what I was thinking.
653 for Viper.
Okay, just looking at the rest of this. So Deft Viper actually Aiming is like one DPM off of Pays, which is
And
kind of crazy how
he's
close
10
they are.
off of Viper. I mean, there's not a huge
Yeah,
difference.
it's
There's
not a
not a
huge difference. Deft is pretty significantly ahead, which is it's saying a lot about what he's tried to do on a lot of these picks, like that Ash game we were talking about earlier. Aiming, the difference between aiming and Viper to me is really just that what Viper has done is often more impressive to me
Yep,
than
I
what
agree with
aiming
that.
has done. And
The thing
aiming
is,
is like,
KT identified also the brokenness of Kai'Sa very early, which is why they got it 10 games in a row before other people realized. And because of some of the other threats on KT, we basically see aiming get to play whatever the fuck aiming wants to play, right? Whereas with Viper, people are much more aware of the danger. And Viper's been fucking insane on Aphelios, right? And that's a pick that, depending on the lane matchup, can be kind of hard to get through the laning phase, but the late game carry potential is obviously just enormous, and he has been amazing on this champion.
I think aiming he's delivered when he's been given opportunities, right? But even his KDA is way higher, but like KT's winning everything.
Yes.
So those are not numbers I really want to look at. And Viper, he has done a lot. He's done a lot of stuff that impresses me in terms of team fights, positioning, and also like clutching out skirmishes. And I think aiming has done that as well. Like the one thing that has really impressed me about aiming is his 2v2s in lane and also his skirmish play where he gets ahead early because he makes all the right calls with his team and follows up on engages. And aiming has a great understanding, I feel, of when he can put pressure on in lane when the rest of his team is going to Herald, for example. He's like, oh, okay, I can actually maybe take this 1v1, maybe even all in and get a kill, or I'm going to apply pressure to plates, or he'll know the timing when he needs to go up and like end up making an impact on the Herald fight. Now, part of that is obviously shot calling and what his team is telling him to do, but I feel like he seems to have a good sense of it. But Viper just seems like he's so good in every single late game team fight that you can never count him out. He almost never will be picked early, unless the comp is just so oppressive or his team is so far behind that, like, positioning and stuff like that isn't going to be enough. Viper has a pretty wide champion pool. Aiming has been reliant on these meta picks that are very strong. And if the meta moves away from Kai'Sa quite significantly, I would worry a little bit for aiming. I wouldn't worry for Viper. I feel like the more we have this conversation about, what they would offer in an all-pro team, I think I have to give it to Viper right now for number one. It's close, but I think it's Viper. And then aiming comes second. Then the third one, like Guma and Deft, they're the fringe picks where you could make an argument for them for sure, especially when you consider what Guma has done with no team. Basically, it's pretty insane.
Yep. I mean,
Like
this is
he's
the
like
most stacked
he's like
position in
Viper
the
with
LCK
Clid.
right now. Yeah. Yeah.
He's like Viper with Clid.
And the other thing about Viper too is like he hasn't had a jungler this whole year. Like Grizzly's looking good. That's not an issue, but it's been he's got training wheels on right now, right? He's still getting to that point, and so it's hard when you don't really have a presence from your jungler in the bot lane, and that's true even of Grizzly now. It's not like Grizzly has the lowest first blood percentage of any jungle in the league. He's not playing for ganks. He's playing to path, counter path, and play late game. So I don't know, man. Like I think Viper is just, and Kiin is just, he's a Renekton one trick at this point in time. He's played 11 games of Renekton. The next one is he's played the most is Jax at 5 games, and he's 1-4 on that pick. Like Kiin doesn't have a big champion pool, right? Which
No.
again, it's just one of those situations where Viper has to carry so much of the weight on this team.
We'll see if Aatrox ends up being super relevant on the next patch. Maybe Kiin can add one more to the champion pool.
But the thing is like I don't think we're gonna, maybe. I mean, the Aatrox buffs are real, obviously, but we don't know what patch the playoffs are going to end up being played on.
Well, the playoffs will be played on 13-14. Actually, we do know that.
Oh, okay.
So this next patch is going to be playoffs patch.
Great.
So
fair enough.
We'll see if Aatrox ends up being super relevant because he's a very strong pick, and those buffs make him seem extremely strong. But teams have played against Aatrox for all time and know how to handle it pretty well. So it might be a pick that's relevant in solo queue, extremely strong there, but like a little bit more niche in the LCK, but still relevant. because he's not going to do what a Jax does still, obviously, in terms of setting up team fights or being able to split push super hard. So the real question is for me, like, is it Pays or is it Deft for
I
that
think
third
it's
spot?
Pays. I think Pays deserves it in this case.
I think what Pays has been able to do that Deft has not been able to do is play any AD carry extremely consistently in the early to mid game, no matter what, like no matter what the draft is. Whereas Deft has kind of struggled. I feel like when he's playing scaling AD carries in the early mid game, he's going to deliver in the late game, and it's not always right. But there have been periods of time where Deft is kind of reliant on Draven, Lucian, those types of picks where he's got strong side power and he can play through just having no resources because that's how Dplus plays. Where they often are playing through mid with Canyon and Showmaker, and Deft doesn't get as many resources in the early game. And sometimes he has struggled in lane, Deft, when he's playing something like an Aphelios, but Pays hasn't really had. I haven't ever really felt like Pays is reliant on a certain type of pick. Like he's played Draven well, he's played Zarya well, he's played Aphelios well. Like his champion pool seems to be a little bit stronger. And like for example, Deft playing Ashe and trying his best, right? We talked about that very recently. That happened yesterday. You picked Ashe though, you made it hard for yourself. Like Pays doesn't do that. Like Pays doesn't go, I want this weird pick. He's like, no, I'm just gonna play what's strong and play what's meta. I'm gonna play it really well. But the stats for Deft, when you consider his team is doing way worse than Gen.G's, are really good. So I think there's an argument to be made, but I think Pays has just done more overall, and more has made a bigger impact. So I guess I'm also down to go Pays for third. But if Deft has like a pop off week 9, like it's kind of that close for me, then maybe I'd reconsider. But I guess at this moment in time, Pays seems to make the most sense. But it's fun that we actually have this deep of an AD carry pool.
No, it's
in
the most
Korea.
back position in Korea for sure. I think you could make very compelling arguments for Gumayushi and Deft in the top 3 as well. It's tough. It's definitely hard to shake it out for sure. And I think it just comes down to individual like voter preference on what you like. I mean, if you want more of a safe cleanup, because Pays kind of it plays like Ruler. You know what I mean? Like that's it. Ruler is the better version of Pays. I mean, Ruler is just fucking incredible, but Pays is still super good for this being his rookie year and does the job he needs to do and has filled Ruler's shoes very well on Gen.G. So yeah, that's why Pays shouldn't be MVP though. In conclusion,
I mean, I don't think that is. It's not going to be my vote at this moment in time.
Well, it's your responsibility to evangelize Wolf.
All right, I could try.
Kiin evangelization in the last week of
I think a lot of people on the global side are pretty open to voting for Kiin. I can tell you that much.
Can the global side, we'll see. Can the global tilt the MVP vote in favor, or will Pays magically win MVP?
I'm gonna just have to call I'm gonna have to do some Kiin like what's the word for this? Like it's not brigading, but like I gotta go in there and go, hey media, like I need to go to the press room and be like, all right, so you guys are voting for MVP. Here's why it's Kiin. You guys are gonna do what you're told, so listen to me.
Sounds great. All right, guys. I think that'll wrap up this episode with all of our all-pro selections. We'll see if we agree with ourselves next week after seeing the final week of competition. Might change things in support. Perhaps AD carry, depending on the weeks that people have. We will see you guys next week to wrap up the regular season of the LCK and do a little playoff previewing. Once we know what those matchups are, we'll see you then.